to understand why you're here and how to live on purpose and in divine harmony. I interweave numerology, angel guides, astrology, theta healing, and coaching to guide you along your spiritual journey. Every week we have a discussion, and this week's discussion is, what would Jesus really do? So thank you all for joining. Thank you for those who are joining live. Maybe you're listening to the audio on the podcast. You can always come back to this video and share your thoughts and join the discussion at any time here on YouTube. So let's get into this. Do you remember those "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets? And they had the WWJD on the bracelet. And I couldn't find mine. I know that I had a few years ago, different ones, different colors. And I wondered, do you know what I'm talking about? Two, do you still have your bracelet? And the idea of wearing the bracelet, it was a reminder to live a life like Jesus. Or do you have something similar that you do today? Share with us in the comments. I absolutely love this idea of wearing something as a reminder of who you are. For example, I have make sure you guys can see this. I have what they call a Ho'oponopono bracelet, if you know the Ho'oponopono prayer. And it reminds me to say that prayer from time to time throughout the day. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Do you remember the bracelets? Do you still have yours? Did you wear one? And maybe you have something similar today as a great reminder. Now, given today's division, I see a lot of Jesus would wear a mask, or God would get the vax. Love thy neighbor. I've heard from the government. I've heard from multiple sources. And I also recently heard God created it, so you need to get it or do it. So let's unpack this. I'm curious to hear from you in the chat. How do you feel when you see these messages? Do you feel any better? Maybe it makes you feel better. Do you feel angry? Are you triggered at all? And a quick reminder for those who aren't familiar with triggers. Triggers are simply a way that tells us that there's something within us that we get to shift or heal. So I'd love to hear from you. When I first saw it, and I may try to find it on my phone, a friend of mine had posted it on Facebook, and I read there was an article posted by a minister, and I don't think it was a local minister. And I read that and I was like, that is really interesting. That someone would write an article about that. And then I started to notice the theme within about 2 weeks, that this was in a lot of different places, not just on social media, but in newspapers as well. And I can't seem to find the snapshot that I had of that. So that was, I do what I can to step into curiosity. Now, I want to share, before we start to unpack this, share with you a little bit about my personal experience in church so you can understand where I'm coming from, okay? Personally, I don't attend a physical church anymore. I used to attend faithfully since I was a kid. I grew up in the Disciples of Christ Church, and as I shifted in 2013, so did the church that I attended. And for a few years, I went from, so I moved down to Indy in 98, and I attended, I would say, a medium-sized church. And then after 2013, I started to attend a very large local church. And at some point, I was no longer getting fed spiritually from that church. I also didn't feel comfortable being my authentic self around the people who I interacted with in the small group sessions and when I volunteered as well. And at some point, the campus pastor called me into his office because he was under the impression that I was not following God, at least it was his version of what he thought I should be doing, without going into all the details. And frankly, I just never went back. It felt like I was being called into the principal's office, and in my 40s, like I had no relationship with God, and that I was not clear about who I was or who God is. And so my experience showed me that people at the church, in organized religion, that they can sometimes get into their ego. And that really comes from fear. And in turn, they tend to push away people. And I don't think that that's their intention. I want you to keep in mind too, ask, what are these intentions, from different people, what they say, what they do, how they're showing up. Because I thought Jesus helped everybody, no matter what they believed, no matter their finances, no matter what they look like, no matter what they did. That was my experience of Jesus. And I also heard the head pastor of that church, he would say that sometimes that God lives within us, and other times, nope, you need to go do X, Y, and Z in order to meet God, in order to see God. And I found that quite confusing, personally. And frankly, it didn't fit with me anymore. In my 45 years of experience, God lives within each one of us. This is how we're connected through these invisible energy cords. And we get to choose to have a relationship with ourselves that leads to the relationship with God. Or you can just say, nope, I know best, and I'm going to continue to live in my ego, which I love this when I read the ego could stand for edging God out. And by the way, as I'm sharing this tonight, it's whatever resonates for you. And if you're not a follower, if you don't have a relationship, there is no right or wrong, good or bad. That is an old paradigm that is leaving this planet, and it's rearing its ugly head before it leaves. And that can be for a whole nother discussion. Okay. So there is no right or wrong. This is just my current experience. Now, a few months ago, I met Dr. Johnny from Bridging the Gap Ministries. And he showed me that there's a difference between religion and church and kingdom. And I remember during one of his messages, he kept talking about religion and kingdom. And I'm thinking, okay, he is using, different verbiage. And I think that we're on the same page, and I'm not sure. So afterwards, I asked for clarification. And as soon as he shared with me what kingdom was and what the difference was, I was like, oh my gosh, I finally found a pastor who gets it, who teaches it very similar to what I teach. And what the difference is that religion and church, and by the way, not all churches, and I'm going to talk about that, but religion a lot of times teaches fear, separation, manipulation. You got to do this to get to God. And kingdom is the unity. It is the we are all one. And that's where we're going. That is where we're going. And so I'm sorry, my brain is going in like 5 different directions. So I want you to just think about that. The difference between the kingdom and walking with God in this present moment day. And if God does not resonate with you, pick a different word, okay? Universe, creator, divine source, Jesus, pick a different word. Don't let the words that someone else uses, including myself, trip you up and trigger you so much that you just disconnect from everything, okay? So the kingdom is, in my understanding, is the unity and being with God in the present moment and being what he calls the word. He, meaning Johnny, calls it the word. And I freaking loved it. And it feels like the majority of humans are so deeply tied to religion and not the kingdom. And by the way, there is no, again, right or wrong, good or bad. It's because at some point in history, people in the church took religion and added fear and manipulation as a way to control them. And it could even be really good marketing to get people to continue to come back and to give more money to the church because something the pastor says one Sunday may save them and they won't go to hell. Now, for those of you who are faithful church followers, I want to hear from you. And when I say faithful church followers, meaning you go to church every single Sunday, I'd love to hear from you. Do you feel like where you go do you notice that there is some sort of fear and manipulation? And if you're not sure, start to listen. Start to listen to the cadence and the words that the pastors and that the leaders of the church are using. Now, those who don't attend church have told me that they don't go to church anymore because of a bad experience that they had. And by the way, I have had my fair share of quote unquote bad experiences, just as the one that I mentioned earlier. And I had a choice, and I've had the same choice multiple times throughout my life. I could just say, screw you, God, which I have at one time. That is a part of why I do what I do right now. Because I was so separated from myself. I was so separated from God. I was angry. I thought God was punishing me. And that was absolutely not the case. So you have a choice. A lot of people will just choose to leave the church and they forget about their journey. They forget about cultivating their relationship with God. Now, I'm not saying that you have to attend church. I haven't attended church in quite some time. So I'm just saying it's important to focus on the relationship with yourself because that is what leads to the relationship with God. And so many of us throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the next thing you know, we're off our path, we're frustrated, we're lonely, we're upset, we're angry, wondering what happened, blaming it on everybody else. And God is asking us to look in the mirror because we had a choice. And keep in mind, churches are ran by humans, and we humans have flaws. Every single human has flaws. So keep that in mind as well. Now, something else that I recently learned is that the Bible you read today isn't the entire Bible. Not all of the books made it into the Bible. And when I found this out, I was like, why? Why wouldn't someone want you to read all of the books if this is the book for you to live your life by? And I find that curious, very, very curious. And I'm going to leave that with you. I'm not going to dive into that here. And again, I think it goes back to the fear and the manipulation because they don't want you to know everything. And by the way, if you've been doing any recent study or homework or research on politics, which I've been doing since last year, you're going to start to notice that it is the same narrative with politics, with marketing, and definitely social media and church. And I feel like church is the thing that we don't want to talk about. Everybody wants to shy away from it. Nobody really wants to talk about that they follow God or that they love God or that, they're a Jesus follower. It's almost like I do this thing, but I don't want to be judged. So I'm not really going to talk about it. Total side note. So, on top of the fear I mentioned earlier, they also decided that you needed to focus on going somewhere to meet God instead of living in the present moment connected to God. Do you hear the difference between religion and the kingdom? And there are churches out there that do focus on the kingdom. Don't get me wrong. My intention with having this discussion tonight is to bring this into your awareness and for you to start asking questions. For those of you who do go to church, for those who don't go to church, and to start to see the narrative of what is really happening and what's been happening for quite some time. And I am not the expert on the kingdom. I invite you to follow Bridging the Gap Ministries. They are this is what Johnny teaches and lives. He does walk the talk. You can check him out on YouTube. You can check him out on Facebook as well, and they also have a website too. So please, please, please check them out. And if you'd like for me to have him on the show, drop that in the comments too. And then you can ask him whatever your questions are. Now, in my perspective, these headlines that I mentioned earlier, they're just another way of instilling fear into people to manipulate them. You need to do what I think is right for you because that's loving your neighbor. And they've been doing this for years. It's just now that people are starting to wake up to it. And my question is, why now are they choosing this narrative to love thy neighbor? And by the way, well, first off, shouldn't we be loving our neighbor no matter what? And before, government wanted separation of church and state, and now that's what I'm hearing from the government. Love thy neighbor. Which is it, y'all? You can't have it both ways. Start to ask questions. And yes, as the chaos continues, because old systems are crumbling down and new ones are creating themselves at the same time, start to ask questions if it doesn't feel right to you. Now, let's go back to the original headlines that I mentioned earlier. God created it, so you need to get it or do it. Huh? In my experience, God and Jesus gives us healing, and we can heal ourselves. We can heal ourselves. That blows my mind. Y'all, my eyesight every single year has been healed. Every year it gets better and better. And I did not take anything in my body for that to happen. And I keep sharing that with people. Put the power back in your hands. Work with God simultaneously. Now, time is going to tell if this shot heals humans. I personally don't think it will. I think it was created to harm instead, and I'm not going to get into that here in this discussion. If you want, I'm happy to do a discussion later on down the road about that. I also honor whatever decision that you make, because guess what? It's your personal decision. And that honoring each other is what brings us one step closer to unity. Because unity is the way out of this situation. Unity is the way out of the matrix. And if you're listening to this, finding yourself getting triggered, ask yourself, what are you getting triggered about? Is there something that's coming up for you that needs to be healed? Are you feeling defensive? Why? Because that is a part of your healing journey. And that is so important right now for each one of us to take responsibility for our own healing journey. And it's going to look different for everybody because we all came into this lifetime to learn different lessons. We all resonate with different ways to heal. And we've all had different experiences, which is why we all have different perspectives. If you'd like to cultivate a relationship with yourself and God, you're invited to the Live on Purpose course. And I decided to run this course again, the final time in 2021, that will start after October 15th. So hop in by October 15th. If you are ready to experience fulfillment, clarity, joy as you create a life that you love, living on purpose and with God, I invite you to join us. It's 8 weeks, all virtual, and we get to choose when we meet collectively together every week. Check everything out at hearts-joy.com/live on purpose. All of the information's there. Also, please go check out Bridging the Gap Ministries. If you really want to understand the kingdom and how that is so different than what is being taught today, I invite you to check them out as well. And I will add their website to the description too. Thank you all so much for joining. I look forward to hearing from each one of you and your different perspectives on this topic as well.